By the time the security guard offered her a chair for the third time, Maeve Lachance had been standing in the lobby of the Selkirk Tower since the morning rush, a travel mug gone cold in one hand and a girl of 8 asleep against her hip. She did not sit. Sitting was for people who had somewhere soft to land afterward, and she did not. The lobby was 40 stories of glass and Tyndall stone, the kind of place where the air conditioning ran cold even in February, and the people who crossed it wore wool coats and lanyards and the particular hurry of people who believed their hours were worth more than yours. None of them looked at her. That was fine. She had not come to be looked at. She had come because the man who ran this building crossed that floor at 5:15 every weekday, on his way to a black Suburban idling on 8th Avenue. And she had watched him do it twice already from the bench across the street before she ever walked through the revolving door. He did not know it yet, but a file with her father's name on it had been sitting in the archive of his own company for 22 years. He did not know that on the 89th day of a job he had not yet offered her, his entire board would sit in a glass room on the 40th floor and go very quiet while a woman they had hired to sort old paper put a single number on a screen. He did not know any of that. He knew only that there was a woman in a thrift store parka standing too still near his front desk, and that her daughter had woken up as he passed and looked at him the way a kid looks at a closed door she has decided, for no reason an adult would understand, to wait beside. Conrad Halloran was 56. He had taken Selkirk energy from a single compression station outside Fort Saskatchewan to a pipeline and processing concern that moved product across 4 provinces and 2 states, and he had done it without ever once falling in love with anything he could not sell. That was his rule, the closest thing he had to a religion. He measured the world in what it earned, what it tied up, and what it bled, and when a thing bled more than it earned, he let it go, and he had let go of a great many things. He had no wife. He had no children. Marriage was a position with no liquidity, and a child was a liability that only deepened with time and never matured into anything you could put on a balance sheet. He had decided this somewhere around 40 and had not seen a reason to reopen the file. It was not coldness, he would have told you. It was discipline. He had been telling himself the difference for a long time. He stopped walking. He looked at the woman and at the girl, and then, the way men like him always end up doing, at her boots, which had been resoled at the toe, with a strip of something that was not quite the right color. He looked at her hands. They were steady. The way she held the child was not the grip of somebody about to come apart. It was the grip of somebody who had been carrying weight for so long she had stopped noticing. It was heavy. She spoke before he could decide whether to. "I'm not here for charity," she said. "I'll work 90 days, bottom of whatever you've got. If I haven't earned a place by then, I'll walk out that door and you'll never see my face again." He did not answer for a while. She had expected that. She had learned a long time ago that when powerful men go silent, it usually means the machine is running. Not that the answer is no. "What can you do?" he said. Not really a question. "Whatever you put in front of me." The girl was still watching him, not with hope, not with fear, just watching, patient, as if she already knew how this ended, and was waiting for the grown-ups to catch up, and that, the sheer absence of begging in a face that small, landed somewhere in Conrad Halloran that 20 years of pitches and term sheets never had. He took out his phone and called the woman who ran his floor. "Records," he said. "Sub-level 2. Probation, 90 days. Starting rate." He did not ask the woman's last name. He would not think to check it for the better part of 3 months. When he finally did, late one night with the city orange below him, he would understand exactly why she had chosen his company and no one else's, and the understanding would cost him a night of sleep he had not lost in years. Her name, for the record, was Maeve Lachance, and the file with her father's name in it was about to stop waiting. The Selkirk Tower had 38 floors above the lobby and 3 below it. The records department lived on the second sub-level, past the loading bay and the heat exchangers, behind a steel door that the rest of the company had stopped thinking about somewhere around the second rebrand. Up top, Everything had been renovated twice: open concept, sit-stand desks, a wall of living moss in reception that a contractor came to mist on Thursdays. Down here, it was fluorescent tubes and gray metal shelving, and the smell of old toner and binder glue. And a woman named Lorna McGuire who had been keeping the place breathing for 23 years. Lorna was 63. She had outlasted 3 chief executives, 4 logos, and a complete gut renovation that replaced every surface on every floor overhead and left her department precisely as it had always been. She did not take it personally. She took it as proof of something she had suspected all along, that the people upstairs believed the paper filed itself. She drank tea from a chipped mug she had carried from home on her first day, and watched the new hire on that first Monday without saying much. She watched the way Maeve opened the first card of returns, read the routing codes, and started shelving without being told the system. She watched her hands move through the folders, the way hands move through work they have done somewhere before. After 20 minutes, Lorna said one thing: "You've done this kind of thing before." Maeve did not look up. "I've done most kinds of things before." Lorna let it go. She had spent 23 years in a basement, watching people arrive and disappear, and she knew the difference between someone passing through and someone who had arrived on purpose with a reason they were not ready to say out loud. The ones passing through watched the clock. This one never did. People who are working towards something don't need to. They already know exactly how much time they have left. By the end of the first week, Maeve had done something nobody in records had done in years. She had quietly rerouted the internal retrieval order so that requests from compliance, integrity, and legal, 3 departments whose files cross-referenced constantly and who had been served in 3 separate runs got pulled together in one pass. She did not ask. She did not write a memo. She just started doing it, and the average turnaround on a file request dropped from 2 days to most of 1, and nobody upstairs noticed except that their paper came faster. Lorna noticed. She found the new run order sketched in pencil on the back of a shredded cheek envelope, studied it for a long while, and pinned it to the board without a word. What Lorna did not see was what Maeve read while she worked. Not the contents, the labels, the project codes, the department names, which floor handled integrity and which handled the money that decided what integrity could afford, who reported to whom, where the chief executive's correspondence was officially routed and where it actually ended up. She was not just filing the company's paper. She was reading the company the way her father had taught her to read a thing, from the inside, by following where the load went and waiting to see where it landed. She had read every annual report Selkirk had published in the last decade, on Saturdays at the Memorial Park Library while Juliet colored under the reference desk. She knew the org chart better than half the people on the 30th floor. She had her reasons. She did not intend to share them. Not yet. Here is the part the company would never have put in an annual report. In this country, close to 1,000 workers go to a job and do not come home from it each year. A number that has barely moved in 2 decades, no matter how many posters get hung in how many lunchrooms. Maeve had a personal interest in one of them. To understand that, you have to go back to a bungalow in the northeast end of Edmonton, the kind built fast and cheap in the 70s, with a chain-link yard and a furnace that knocked when it kicked on. Maeve grew up there. The rent, and later the mortgage, which her parents treated as a sacred thing, was always paid early, because the world did not hand second chances to people who looked and sounded like them. Her father was Émile Lachance. He had come west from a mill town in northern New Brunswick with a grade 10 education and learned the rest at night while working full shifts, and he ended up an integrity inspector at a gas processing plant out in Strathcona County. The man who walked the lines with an ultrasonic gauge and read the metal for a living. He did not build anything you could see. He looked after the things that kept other things from coming apart. He understood corrosion the way other people understand weather. He understood that the part of a pressure vessel nobody ever looks at is the part that decides whether the vessel holds or whether it opens up some Tuesday morning, and takes the men standing near it. He taught Maeve to read an inspection chart at the kitchen table when she was 9. Not as a game, as a language. He'd spread the printouts across the arborite and run a finger along the wall thickness readings and tell her what each number meant. This is healthy steel. This is steel that's thinking about quitting. This is the number where you stop the line and you don't let anybody talk you out of it. She learned how metal fails before she learned long division. He had a saying he repeated. So often it stopped being a saying and became a part of the furniture of the house. The steel doesn't lie, it just waits. Her mother was Thérèse Lachance, who cleaned downtown office towers on the overnight shift. 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 4 nights a week, for 14 years. She came home smelling of industrial floor wax and slept until early afternoon, and then ran the household with the precision of a woman who had counted every dollar twice. She gave Maeve the family budget at 11 and told her to find the leak. Maeve found a doubled bank charge and a long-distance plan they no longer used, and her mother said bon and asked her to find more. Between the two of them, Émile and Thérèse built something that never showed up on any ledger. They built a daughter who believed that a system was a thing you could read, that a problem had a shape, and that the distance between where you stood and where you belonged was measured not in luck, but in what you knew and what you were willing to do with it. Émile carried a field logbook, black cover, the corners gone soft, the pages swollen from 20 years of being in and out of a coverall pocket in the cold. He wrote in it every day: thickness readings, corrosion rates, sketches of weld seams in the margins of grocery lists, problems nobody had assigned him that he solved anyway because solving them was how his mind stayed sharp. On the last page, he wrote something to his daughter. She would not read it for years. She was not ready. She did not know yet what it said. But she carried the book the way he had carried it, close, in an inside pocket, where it could not be taken without her knowing. Émile Lachance died on a Thursday in March. He was 43. 3 weeks earlier, he had flagged a section of high-pressure piping on the inlet side of the plant. Corrosion under the insulation, wall thickness down past the limit. A clear and specific recommendation to shut that run and replace the spool before anyone worked beside it. He wrote the report himself, careful, dated, exact. He put the cost of doing it right at $215,000. The report went up the chain to a man who looked at the number, looked at a plant that was already over budget for the quarter, and wrote 3 words in the margin in blue ink: defer, non-priority. 3 weeks later, the spool let go during a routine restart. Émile was 10 meters away with a clipboard. The men he had tried to protect were the ones who pulled him out. There was no point in the ambulance hurrying, and it didn't. Maeve was in grade 12. She found out in 3rd period chemistry. When Siller came to the door and looked at the teacher first instead of at her, and she knew, before either of them said a word, because she had already learned to read the look adults give each other when they are deciding how to hand you something that will break you. Thérèse filed a claim and then a suit. The lawyer she could afford was competent. The company's lawyers were not competent. They were expensive, which is a different and more powerful thing. The case dragged through 18 months of motions designed not to find the truth, but to outlast the person looking for it, and in the end, a tribunal found that the operator had met the minimum standard in effect at the time of the incident. Minimum. The word followed the family around like a second eviction notice. Thérèse did not die of any one thing. She came apart the way a structure comes apart, when you pull the supports out one at a time and tell yourself each one was non-essential. The suit, the firing that came after. She made a small error on a chart at the senior's home because she hadn't slept properly in a year. The empty chair at the kitchen table where a man used to draw cross-sections on napkins. She was gone before Maeve turned 21. So Maeve did what you do. She bussed tables and cleaned offices, the same overnight towers her mother had cleaned, and she took courses online on a laptop she bought, used with a crack across the corner. She covered with packing tape, because she did not have the money to fix it twice. She read her father's logbook on the bus the way other people read scripture. Not for comfort, for instruction. Every page was a problem somebody else had created by cutting a corner, and a man who had been right about it, and a system that had not cared. At 26, she had a daughter, Juliet, after a relationship with a man who stopped returning her calls before the second line on the test had finished turning blue. She did not look for him. She did not have time for a search that would not change the result. She finished a diploma in records management at 30 online, between shifts, with a toddler asleep across her knees. And somewhere in there she started pulling the thread. It began with the public record of her father's death, the workplace incident report, the operator's name, the corporate registration. She followed the ownership backward the way Emile had taught her to trace a load through a structure. Follow the weight, see where it sits. The operator was a subsidiary. The subsidiary was held by a regional gas concern. The regional concern had been folded 9 years before into a Calgary holding company that moved product across 4 provinces and managed several $billion in midstream infrastructure. The holding company was Selkirk Energy. The chief executive sat on the 38th floor of a glass tower on 8th Avenue. She did not go down to that lobby to beg a stranger for a job. She went because her father's death had a return address, and it was 40 floors up. The second month moved faster than the first, not because she worked any faster, but because the building had begun to feel the effects of someone who understood systems operating inside a system that had forgotten it was one. On the 11th day, a quarterly risk package was mice routed to the basement. 80 pages, a project model bound for the board, sent down to records by an analyst who had transposed 2 digits in the internal code. Maeve should have rerouted it. That was the job. Instead, she read the summary, and then she read the whole thing, and then she sat at the sorting bench on her 15-minute break and wrote 1 page on the back of a retrieval slip. Not a rewrite, a distillation. The 2 assumptions in the model that did not hold against the company's own field data, and what they did to the bottom line if you left them alone. She clipped it to the front and sent it up to the right address. Priya Anand found it 3 hours later. Priya was 41, the chief operating officer, a woman who had come up through operations consulting and did not tolerate vagueness or waste, and who was loyal to Conrad Halloran in the unconditional way of a person who had been given a real chance by someone who hadn't had to. She read the 1 page twice. Then she opened the 80-page model and checked it against the page, and the page was better than the summary the analytics team had written. It caught a risk they had missed, using the company's own numbers to argue against the company's own forecast. She called the analyst. He said he hadn't written it. She checked the routing log. Somebody in records had read a board-grade risk model, understood it, and produced something sharper than the department whose entire job that was. She had Maeve brought up to the 30th floor. Maeve came in the same clean, pressed clothes she wore every day and stood in front of the desk because no one had offered her a chair. Priya put the page down between them. "You wrote this?" "Yes." "Where did you learn to read a model like this?" "On my own, mostly. The rest from my father." "That's not really an answer." "It's the one I've got." Priya looked at her for a long moment, the way an engineer looks at a material, trying to find where it bends and where it breaks, and could not locate the point. "You're in records." "Yes." "You don't belong in records." "That's not for me to decide." Priya leaned back. She had spent 15 years in rooms full of people performing competence, and this woman's was not performing anything. She answered exactly what was asked and not 1 syllable more. "Stay where you are," Priya said. "I'm going to be watching." Maeve went back down to the basement and said nothing about it to Lorna. She picked up the cart where she'd left it. Lorna watched her come back and noticed only that her hands were steady, the same as always, which told her that whatever had happened upstairs had changed nothing. Maeve was willing to show. It had changed in something else. That night, Priya opened her laptop and typed herself a single line. "Records hire, flag for review," and saved it in a folder she kept for things that did not yet have a category, a folder she had opened maybe 3 times in 4 years. What moved Maeve up, in the end, was a Tuesday in the 8th week. Conrad Halloran took the freight elevator to the second sublevel at 4:45. He did not normally go to the basement. He did not normally do anything that was not on his calendar, and his calendar had him upstairs until 6. He told himself he was checking a facilities flag. There was a real one, a weep in a chilled water line near the archive, and he could have sent anyone, and he went himself. He found Maeve pushing a cart down the corridor between the bay and the shelves. She saw him before he saw her and did not slow down. "How are the 90 days?" he said. "I've got 31 left, and then what?" "That depends on what you see in 31 days. He looked at her hands on the cart, not leaning on it, holding it, the way you hold a thing you're about to move. He noticed the way she built a sentence, all load-bearing, nothing decorative. He had spent 25 years reading people across tables and trusted that read more than any model, and standing in a basement hallway he found he could not get a clean read on her at all. He could not find the angle. That had not happened in a long time. He nodded once and walked to the freight elevator and said nothing else, and upstairs he pulled her personnel file and looked at it for a long while. Emergency contact? None. Employment history? Thin. Education? A diploma from an online program? That's wrong, he thought. Nobody arrives that precise from nowhere. He closed the file. He did not open it again for 2 weeks. On Priya's recommendation, he moved her. Temporarily, no title, no raise, just access. To Integrity Records support on the 26th floor, 3 desks and a shared terminal that reached the whole project archive. "Don't tell her I approved it," he said, because he wanted to see what she did with the room, not what she said about it. There is what people say and there is what they do, and he had built his life on the gap between. She reported up on the next Monday at 6 in the morning and did not ask why or who. She opened the archive and began to read, not the files she'd been handed, all of them. Every project Selkirk had built, bought, or run in 20 years, each one a master file. Timelines, contractor agreements, integrity assessments, incident logs, settlements. She worked through them the way she'd worked the carts, patient, methodical, willing to read everything else in order to find the one thing. On the 69th day she found it. The folder was labeled with a subsidiary code and a year, 22 years gone. A gas plant in Strathcona County, 140 pages. She opened it at 7 in the morning and did not close it until 9. She read the scope. She read the contractor list. She read the integrity section. She read her father's report, 3 pages, dated 3 weeks before his death, the corrosion under the insulation, the wall readings past tolerance, the recommendation, the $215,000. She read the 3 words in the margin in blue ink. Defer, non-priority. She read the name signed beneath them. Hollis Crane, then the company's vice president of operations. Now, for the last 20 years, a member of the board of directors of Selkirk Energy. She read the incident report. She read her father's name and the words fatality on site. And, near the bottom, file closed, no further action. Her hands did not shake. The woman 2 desks over noticed nothing, because there was nothing to notice. Maeve closed the folder, logged out, and sat for 4 minutes without moving. Then she reached into her bag and took out the black logbook and opened it to the last page and read what her father had written there, slowly, the way she always did. Then she closed it, put it back, picked up the next briefing document on her desk, and kept working as though the last 2 hours had not happened. That night she put Juliet to bed in the apartment in the Northeast, and the girl, half asleep, said the thing she said every night. "Tell me one true thing." It had started years ago as a way to settle a kid who didn't want the lights off, and it had become the closing ceremony of their days. "The bus was early. Your spelling test is on the fridge. I love you more than yesterday. And less than tomorrow." One true thing. Every night, no matter how thin the day had been. Maeve sat on the edge of the bed and found, for the first time in a long time, that she had a true thing too big to say to an 8-year-old. So she said a smaller one. "Your grandfather was the smartest man I ever knew," she said, "and I'm going to make sure people know his name." Juliet was already asleep. Maeve stayed on the edge of the bed for a long time. She had a choice, and she knew exactly what it was. She had photographs of all 140 pages on her phone, taken in 12 minutes at lunch. She could send them to a reporter. She could file with the regulator. She could walk into the chief executive's office in the morning, lay the folder on his desk, say the name Hollis Crane, and watch it detonate. Any of those would end the 90 days. Any of those would end the job. And Juliet needed a mother who came home every night more than she needed a mother who'd been right. So she made her father's kind of decision. She did not leak it. She did not burn the building down from the outside. She decided to climb to a place where her voice carried weight inside it, and then she would speak. Not from anger, from authority. The easy road was wreckage. She chose the harder one, the one that built something, because her daughter was watching. And what you build in front of your kids becomes part of how they build. The thing that finally put her in the room was the North Reach expansion. It was the largest project in Selkirk's pipeline, a new lateral pushing north toward the oil sands, hundreds of millions of dollars, and the board was set to vote final approval at the quarterly meeting. Maeve was assigned to assemble the briefing package. 14 documents, 9 binders, delivered to the 40th floor boardroom the day before. She did all of it. She also read all of it. And in the integrity model, she found the same ghost that had killed her father wearing different clothes. The reinspection schedule for one buried section assumed a corrosion rate of 1/10 of a millimeter a year. The field data from the very soil that section ran through. Chloride heavy, poorly drained, the company's own surveys put the real rate at closer to 3 times that. On paper, the gap looked small, a fraction of a millimeter. Stretched along years of operation, it meant a stretch of wall would thin past its safe limit roughly 6 years before anyone was scheduled to go look at it. Nobody had caught it, because everybody had checked the formulas and the formatting and the summary tables, and the number at the bottom of a column is only ever as honest as the number somebody typed at the top. She wrote it up in 4 pages, the way Emile would have written a report. No names. No feelings. Here is the data. Here is the error. Here is what happens if no one corrects it. Here is the cost of correcting it against the cost of being wrong. She left it on Priya's desk at 5:45 and ran for the train to make daycare pickup. Priya found it at 7 the next morning. Read it again, sat still for 4 minutes, and carried it into the chief executive's office. Conrad read the first page, then the second, then went back to the first. Who wrote this? The woman from records. He looked at the pages for a long time. The analysis was correct. The error was real. The person who had found it had been in the building under 3 months, had started in the basement, and had never once asked for a title or a raise or her name on anything. He had his assistant bring her up. She came into the boardroom on the morning of the 89th day, carrying a laptop and nothing else, in the same pressed clothes and the resoled boots, and crossed to the screen at the head of the long glass table and connected the cable in one motion that took 4 seconds. 9 board members sat around the table. Priya was against the wall. Conrad introduced her in one sentence. This is Maeve Lachance. She found what the rest of us missed. Hollis Crane sat in the 3rd chair on the left, where he had sat for 20 years. He was 66. He opened his binder to the first tab and did not look up. She did not introduce herself again or thank anyone for the chance. She began. The North Reach model, she said, assumed a corrosion rate of 1/10 of a millimeter a year on the buried sections. The company's own soil surveys, here and here, put the real rate at roughly 3 times that. Compounded over the operating life, one section reached the end of its safe wall thickness about 6 years before its scheduled reinspection. She moved through the slides the way she'd moved through the carts. No pauses, no flourishes, 1 point a slide, every point standing on the company's own numbers. By the 4th slide, the man across the table had put his pen down. By the 7th, the woman at the end had leaned in. The questions came and she answered each one exactly. No more, no less. How did you find the discrepancy? By comparing the model's assumption to your own geotechnical surveys and the corrosion logs from 3 comparable lines. Why wasn't it caught? Because a review verifies that the math is done correctly. It does not always verify that the first number reflects the ground. Hollis Crane had stopped writing. He was looking at the screen, not at the data, at the shape of the thing, the order of it, the way it built. Something in it was familiar to him in a way he could not place, and it bothered him the way a name on the tip of your tongue bothers you. She finished the 14th slide. The financial section was done. The board had what they'd come for. Conrad began to speak. He was about to thank her. "There's one more section," she said, "if you'll let me." He looked at her. She looked back. He nodded. The slide read deferral history. She did not explain why it was there. She began the way she'd begun everything else, with data. "Over 20 years," she said, "across the projects in this archive, on-site inspectors filed formal integrity warnings on 5 separate lines. 3 resulted in repair. 2 were deferred." She clicked. A chart, 2 columns, the cost of doing the repair against the cost actually incurred when it wasn't done. Cleanup, fines, settlements, lost production. The first deferral, 8 years back, a flange the company chose not to replace for $90,000. The release cost $1.4 million and no one was hurt. She clicked again. The second was 22 years old, a gas plant in Strathcona County. An inspector had identified corrosion under the insulation on a high-pressure run and recommended replacement at $215,000. The recommendation was reviewed by the Vice President of Operations and marked non-priority. She paused, not for effect, but because the next sentence was the one she had carried for 22 years. 3 weeks later, she said, the spool failed during a restart. The inspector who wrote the report was 10 meters away. He died on site. The room was very still. Hollis Crane's pen had not moved in 2 minutes. He was no longer trying to place what was familiar. He had placed it. The order, the patience, the data first and the conclusion last. He had seen it once before, in a 3-page report, typed and dated 3 weeks before a pressure vessel came apart. She did not look at him. She looked at the room. Fixing it would have cost $215,000, she said. Not fixing it cost 1 life and about $3.8 million in everything that came after. That's a ratio of roughly $18 lost for every dollar saved. I'm not making a moral argument. I'm making a financial one. The question for this board is whether our integrity protocols today reflect what we learned from that, or whether they reflect what we found it more convenient to forget. She closed the laptop. Nobody asked who the inspector was. The last name on the incident report was the same as the name Conrad had said when she walked in. The room emptied slowly, the way a room empties when people have been handed something and don't yet know how to hold it. Some looked at her on the way out. Most didn't. One nodded. Hollis Crane stood, gathered his binder, slid his pen into his jacket, and walked to the door without meeting a single pair of eyes. His footsteps made no sound on the carpet. Priya stayed against the wall. Conrad stayed at the head of the table. Maeve had not moved from her spot in 34 minutes. "You didn't come here for a job," Conrad said. "I came for both, the job and the answer." "What answer?" "Whether this company would do the right thing when it finally had the chance to." He told her to sit down. He asked about her father. She told him, not all of it, the parts that mattered. Émile Lachance, integrity inspector, self-taught and then trained at night, looked after the things that kept other things from coming apart, wrote a report 3 weeks before he died, was overruled by a man who is still on this board. She told him about Therese, the tribunal, the word minimum, the years after. She told him about the logbook still in her coat, every page intact. He listened the way he listened when something required a decision he couldn't take back. Then he asked what she wanted. "I want the integrity protocols rewritten so a budget can't overrule a wall thickness," she said. "I want an independent audit of every line where a warning was deferred. And I want the 90 days to become permanent, not because of who my father was, because of the report I just handed you." He looked at her for a long time. He was a man who had spent 30 years turning people into positions and downside, and he found, for the second time in 3 months, that he could not turn this one into anything at all. He nodded once. Hollis Crane did not wait for the audit. He knew how these things moved. He had been the one who moved them. He resigned that Thursday before the findings were final, and called Conrad that night with the steadiness gone out of his voice. The steadiness that had once made 3 words in a margin feel like a reasonable decision. The audit turned up 2 more deferrals he had signed. The board voted to make the protocol changes permanent and the audit public. The position Conrad created had not existed before her. Integrity oversight, reporting straight to the chief operating officer, full authority to halt any active line where the safety case had not been independently checked. He offered it to her on the 90th day and called it not a favor but a correction, and she understood the difference and took it. She did not shake his hand. She nodded, once, the way he had nodded at her in the basement, the gesture that says everything that needs saying without spending a word. She went home that night to the apartment in the Northeast. Juliet was already in bed. Maeve sat on the edge of it and opened the black logbook to the last page, the one she had read on buses and break tables for 22 years. Her father had written it the week she was born, the handwriting smaller and more careful than the rest, like a man who knew he was writing something that would have to last. He wrote about holding her for the first time, about the weight of her, about the world waiting outside the window. He wrote about his one real fear, not poverty, not failure, but that his daughter would grow up in a place that mistook where she came from for what she was capable of, that would read her circumstances and decide it already knew her ending. If you're reading this and I'm not there, he wrote, what they see is not what you are. What you build will outlast what they take from you. And then one more line, the last thing he ever wrote, smaller still. I wanted to give you a world that. The sentence stopped there. He had gone to work that morning and not come home. For 22 years she had read that broken line as the measure of what was stolen. That night she read it differently. The sentence was not what he failed to give her. It was the thing she had spent 90 days finishing, not in ink, in action, in the lobby with a sleeping girl on her hip, in the basement and the carts and the train she caught at 5:30. In 4 pages of corrosion data and 1 slide nobody had asked for. He had wanted to give her a world. She had gone and built one instead. Juliet stirred. Tell me one true thing, she said, not really awake. Maeve thought about all the true things now sitting behind her. The file, the margin note, the name, the years. She picked the one an 8-year-old could carry into sleep. Your grandfather kept a lot of people safe, she said. And today, finally, the right people found out his name was Émile Lachance. Say it once with me. Émile Lachance, the girl mumbled and was gone. Maeve stayed on the edge of the bed a long while, the city humming outside the thin glass, the logbook warm in her hand. So here is the thing worth saying plainly, now that the story's done. Somewhere right now there is a person sitting in a job far below what they're capable of. Not because they didn't earn the room, but because no one ever opened the door, and sometimes the person who finally opens it is the one who was never supposed to be in the building at all. The quietest one in any room is often carrying the most. If this brought to mind someone whose work went unseen, whose warning went unread, whose name got filed under closed, say it out loud, else. They outlast the men who sign the margins. And if any of it made you angry, that anger is information. Don't waste it.